Okay, we can wait 2-3 minutes just to have a few people join and then we'll begin. Okay, I guess we can start now. Hi everyone, I'm Maheen Humayun and we're here today with Saba Karim Khan. I'll give you guys a little brief bio about her and about her debut novel, Skyfall, which is what we're here to discuss. I'm so excited all of you are here today, and we'll make this an exciting session as we talk a little bit about writing, fiction, the publishing world, and a lot more. So, Saba Karim Khan is an author, award-winning filmmaker, and educator. Her doc film, Concrete Dreams, was released recently. Concrete Dreams, Some Roads Lead Home. It's won multiple awards at global film festivals, and it's now on Amazon Prime Video, so all of you should check it out. Her debut novel, Skyfall, was recently published by Bloomsbury, and Skyfall delves into the life of the protagonist, Rania, a tour guide by day and classical singer by night, and it's based in Lahore's famous red light district. So now I'll just kind of ask Saba to tell us a little bit about the book, just a general kind of view into it.
Hi, Maheen. Thank you so much for doing this, and I'm really excited. Also, I guess before we jump in, I just want to say a big thank you to Liberty Books, because their support with Skyfall it's been staggering. And it's the reason why the book has reached Pakistan. And it would have been such a pity if that hadn't happened. So I'm really grateful to them. And thanks for that generous introduction as well. So the book is titled Skyfall. I get asked a lot about the title. The title literally means the last attempt that you make against a group of people when you're outnumbered. And I think that's sort of the spirit that crystallizes the world of this book. And, despite the dark spaces that it shoves readers into, which I know it definitely does, the primary source of Skyfall, I think, remains this movement from darkness to light. And it's a metaphor that's, referenced repeatedly in the book. So that's kind of, I think, the spirit behind it.
I love that. And I think as readers, that's something you cling to, waiting kind of for the light to reach. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the inspiration, because I've been reading some really interesting stories, and I think the viewers will be really fascinated to hear where you got the idea and how the seeds kind of formed.
Yeah, well, Maheen, I think there's two things to it. First of all, if I talk about just the inspiration of writing a book, I would have to say that Skyfall is sort of, I think from scratch to finish, it's in memory of my father. And I think it's because for the 25 years of my life that he was alive, whether it was at home, whether it was on a long drive, it was during some kind of crazy midnight feast we'd be having, he would talk to us about these 3 different books that he had scripted in his mind. And so I think Skyfall is a very modest, it's a very tiny attempt to fulfill a really large dream that he carried. But coming to the book itself, I think for a while I'd had this nagging feeling, this feeling that was plaguing me, which is that our jobs often make us feel like we're cogs in a wheel. It feels like we're doing this for the check at the end of the month. And of course, that check is really important to all of us, and it should be. But there was a big focus on living my life for the resume, and gratification and happiness was almost like adjunct to that really mechanical life I had started living. And I think I trained my mind to think, hey, I mean, I can't reroute. I can't really change, the way I'm leading my profession. And then one winter, I was sitting at NYU, and we were, a guest speaker had come to talk to the students. And I've said this now at several places and in interviews, but he said something that was staggering, and it was jaw-dropping. He was quoting someone else, and I'm probably butchering the quote now, but it was something like, most men and women lead lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them. And he said, hey, what's your song? And he asked everyone to take 5 minutes, write their song on a piece of paper, and, just share it with the person sitting next to you. And it was very intimidating because obviously, I hadn't really spent much time thinking about this before, 5 minutes to come up with something like that. But yet I think Skyfall seeds were sown that morning, because those 5 minutes forced me to think about something that I had been putting off for a long time. So I think that's kind of the little backstory.
I love that so much. And I think that'll definitely resonate with a lot of people, because so many people they ask a lot of writers, is there that one moment? And it doesn't have to be one moment, it can be a series of moments. But I love that you have this story. And I think a fun thing could be, if those of you who are watching, if you guys could think about that question, and maybe if you guys have a song that hasn't been sung yet, what is that to you? And what does this quote essentially mean to you? So if you want to drop it down in the comments and we could read them out at the end, that could be something exciting to do.
Yes.
So one thing I think that fascinated me most, or not even fascinated, something that I just loved about the book and devoured, was the way that mostly, typically in Pakistani fiction, it's something that we don't really see a lot, which is the portrayal of sexuality and, of course, shedding light on the LGBT community. So without giving a lot of spoilers, I wanted to kind of segue into the idea of using these taboo topics in your book and how that came together, and the reactions to it as well, because we know generally as society the stigmas that surround it, especially when it comes to fiction, because freedom of speech is something that we struggle with in fiction and outside of fiction. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of what you said is right at the heart of Skyfall, right? And when I think about it now, obviously, when you're in the midst of it, maybe you're not as conscious, or you don't give it so much thought, at least not so mindfully. But I have to say, I guess because it's fiction, and because I also write nonfiction, I kind of, I'm kind of now steering with the difference. I think with Skyfall, I didn't set out holding kind of like a placard to champion the feminist movement, nor did I want Skyfall to offer window dressing diversity to South Asian women. I've seen that happen, and I think I struggle with it a little bit, when I'm consuming that kind of material. I think what's personal to me is that when I think about exploring the lives of women, their sexuality, their desires, that can be loud, but that can also be quietly fierce and equally powerful. And I think in Skyfall we see both those shapes taking form, loud and kind of quietly fierce. And I guess as a woman of color, having grown up in Karachi, I find my storytelling now is really intimately bound with the daily battles that I grew up wrangled in, and that was shoved to the back of my mind for so long. And somehow it seems hard to disentangle that now, whether I'm writing fiction or nonfiction. And that's why I think it's front and center in Skyfall. The other thing is that I think I've also struggled, as far as Pakistani women go, talk of sexuality goes. I think I've struggled with how much we've relied on Western representation. I've done that myself, and during my time at LUMS, during the time I studied anthropology at Oxford, now at NYU, and mostly I've just complained about it without taking charge, And so I think I see Skyfall as an attempt to reclaim some of those Pakistani women's voices and do it in a vocabulary that feels more of our own, which doesn't feel like I've suddenly helicoptered this in from the West and done a Control C, Control V, to it. And also that doesn't feel like tokenism, right? Because we see enough of those tokenistic attempts to save the brown woman that happens. So yes, I think Skyfall definitely deals with female sexuality and desire. Female desire is a conversation I've been having so much, even post the book, especially with my sister. She's talked to me a lot about it. And I think the way I see it, Maheen, is that a woman with desires in a country like Pakistan is a troublemaker. Having desires erodes the grain of being a good woman, a good girl, a good other. You're supposed to be seen as a sealed pack, whatever that means. And yet we know all too well that living a desire agnostic life is anti-human. Like it's not possible. So I think with Skyfall, I simply wanted to spark a conversation, no matter how messy, no matter how uncomfortable that makes people. And of course, I was well aware of that. Just about a conversation around how much we've normalized violence, how much we've normalized, there's videos of women being grabbed at a bank, and somehow there's a flurry of comments beneath it blaming her, saying, no, but she never reacted to it. And so that's somehow consent. A woman gets raped and we say, oh, why was she out at that hour? So I think those are issues that really make me seethe as does so much of the conversation around LGBTQ. And so I knew that obviously this is not going to settle comfortably with any and everyone, but then you don't write to please everyone, I suppose. And I felt like, I can't create these sanitized, neat, good women categories. And so the women in Skyfall are messy, they're contradictory, they're really untidy characters. I think they move between being vulnerable to being fearless, being conformists, being deviants, and yet I think they're embracing that chaos. And I didn't want to be reductive. So I guess the long and short of it is, I decided, what the heck? I'm going to just rip open these boxes that we love to stuff Pakistani women in. And I'm going to allow my readers to view the miracles that can happen when you unchain Pakistani women. So I think that's how I see it.
That's beautiful, and we are all here for it. I think that's something that's the most interesting part when you're reading fiction and everything just connects and weaves together in such a perfect way, and nothing is seemingly out of the box because it's so ordinary and normal, and yet in society these things are instantly tagged as other. And that's why I think I love reading the book so much, because that journey of all the different characters, and especially the women characters, just makes you realize that we need more fiction, and we need more, not just fiction, we know art that normalizes behavior like this. I think there was a line in the book that really resonates with me, the idea when Rania, protagonist, is talking about singing, and she's talking about what people say about singing women and how she takes charge of that through her voice. And it's just this beautiful and perfect metaphor for women using their voices. I thought that was so lovely. And that kind of perfectly drives into my next question for you. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the development of your characters. I think all of them have this beautiful character development that is very clear, be it through their different locations, their interactions, relationships. But I wanted to talk about building that development, so more about your writing journey and writing, like picking these characters up, putting them into different boxes. How did you kind of manage that?
Yeah, well, thank you for those really kind words. Thank you, Maheen. That's very reassuring. Um, I think in terms of the characters, when I think about it now, sort of retrospectively, I think when the decision to write Skyfall took root, I think the thing that was most visceral and most vivid in my mind were Usher and Rania's voices. And I had this sense of, I wasn't sure what they look like or how they move, but I was sure of what their voices sound like. And I think that was pivotal for me. And one of my early author reviews, one of the blurbs put it, I think, very beautifully. And Miguel said something like, that voice grabs us like an aria sung from a dark street corner. And when I read that blurb, I was like, yeah, gosh, like I think that's exactly the image that, I had in my mind throughout, which is Usher and Rania in a gully in the red light district of Lahore, literally singing this ballad of rebellion and resistance. So I think, but in terms of specific, kind of coming to Rania's character and Asha's character, I think with the female protagonist, I wanted to tell a complex and kind of coming of age story of a girl hailing from these choked slums of Hiramandi, who, like you said, is a tour guide by day and she's a classical singer by night. Yet, I think what happens a lot, Maheen, especially with fiction coming from the subcontinent, is that we try and dumb down these characters to play to the West and say, oh, well, if Rania is from Hiramandi, then of course she can't be intuitive and she can't be intelligent and she's got to be all things jahil and kind of dumb. And so I think with her character, I wanted to show that, there's just no way of being reductive and boxing her into this neat, straight jacketed category. But I think what I want to talk to you about more, which doesn't get maybe asked as much, is the male character. And the reason why I say that is that the character of Asher, who is the Indian filmmaker, he's the visible but indispensable gravity that I think catalyzes the whole journey. And the reason why I'm really keen to talk about him is that I think that character, it underscores a really important thread in the book, which is of love jihad. I mean, it's 2020, and one would imagine that a conspiracy theory like love jihad sounds so primitive, And yet, we're in a world where the crackdown on Hindu Muslim marriages in India is reaching this astronomically dangerous point. What we've seen happen in the aftermath of the Tanishq ad with, the scene from The Suitable Boy. And I don't think these are standalone instances of intimidation or violence. I see them as emblematic of an issue that has always existed, but that kind of remained buried under the garb of, political correctness. And suddenly it's been normalized to the extent that it's out on our streets and squares, and it's okay to have someone sing the national anthem at gunpoint on a road. And that's suddenly normal. So I think Ashir's character, the Indian filmmaker's character, really takes aim at this India-Pakistan context. And I think for me, that stems from a really personal mood board, as I'm sure it does for you and for so many other people who've grown up on either side of the border. Because I suppose I grew up in Karachi, and the threat of a border breakout, like it was a tinderbox waiting to explode. I remember my brother and I used to have this funny little game with the cushion in our houses. We used to have these trenches and pretend India's attacking. And now I think about that and I'm like, if my daughters were doing that, that would make me so nervous. Suddenly that's okay to be a children's game. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that the characters in the book are they're trying to take us to a world where coexistence is the currency, to try and imagine a post-apocalyptic, a post-love jihad world, where I think you can outlaw the weapons that we're now using against communities like Muslims, where I don't need to show you proof in a handbasket of my love for a woman or a man of another faith just to avoid being incarcerated. So I think especially in the recent past, having watched this India-Pakistan equation really deteriorate, kind of friendships even decline into, I don't know, just indiscriminate animosity. Like, I think it fueled a lot of soul searching. It forced me to ask that 7 years on, not only is it that we haven't left each other's throats, we're actually sliding downwards, and we're sliding with menacing volition. Why is that happening? And is there a way to imagine a better way of living? I think that's what the characters in the book are kind of compelling us to think about.
Definitely. And I think they do kind of lead that conversation. And generally, I think it's up to the media and writers of fiction and nonfiction both to kind of draw this narrative and perceive it in different complex perspectives. And I think that's one thing that you're doing. And another thing that kind of just resonated with me while reading was the fact that he is this Indian filmmaker and he captures all these tiny, beautiful moments that are so quintessentially Lahore. And it shows this very raw, beautiful image of the way things essentially are and how we kind of wear these different types of glasses to view them, maybe view our relationship with India or India's relationship with Pakistan, but how he kind of really drives it home by picking these imperfect moments to shed light on. I think and that's what we kind of tend to forget a lot of the time, not us in particular, but a more general we. So this kind of draws me into the idea of how we were talking about. You said that a lot of your locations and settings kind of emerge as characters.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of talk a little bit about that, and I even want to ask you, in fact, about the research that went into that, because each setting that you describe, it's so specific and beautiful and everything comes to life. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Maheen, right from the cover, I suppose, right? And the reason why I pick up the cover is that we had so much back and forth on it. And yet, yeah, I mean, I think because like I was saying, I think I had this really visceral impression of the places. And yes, I do kind of see them as working like characters in the book. And you tend to get really typical images of Pakistan on the internet. And I didn't want this typical oppressed woman on my cover. So, we ended up having a beautiful photo shoot in front of the Sheesh Mahal in Lahore. Arish, who's a wonderful photographer, did that. But coming to your question about locations, I think I see this movement between Lahore, Delhi, New York. It really lies at the heart of the entire story, in the entire arc, because as we move settings, we're also seeing a symbolic shift, which is we're moving from nightfall to day to dawn. And my early reviewers who read the book, a lot of them were American authors who had very little familiarity with the subcontinent and, obviously hadn't visited. And they kind of responded to say that the setting and the sense of Lahore comes across very, very powerfully. And I think that was a big relief because, I can't assume that it's everyone who's roamed the streets of Lahore the way I have. But the other thing about places, I suppose, is that her journey from Lahore all the way to New York was, I think it was non-negotiable for me because again, it's this coming of age story for a girl who's from these choked slums, who grew up thinking, oh, this is the glittering first world, the West, this country that's so much superior to mine, that is out there to save the world, that has her believe that hers is, I mean, a really, really inferior nation. I don't want to use any other word, which might be a bit borderline, sort of not halal. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that in order for her to have that reclamation of Lahore, I needed her to make that journey all the way to New York and to debunk some of these myths that she had about both those places, and then I think, again, that also worked because a lot of the fiction that I've read coming from the subcontinent tends to play to these tropes, fitting Pakistan into a particular category, fitting the West into a category. And I guess the point is, I didn't want to downsize the problems in Pakistan. So, of course, she's got this abusive father who's peddling the flesh trade in Hira Mandi. There's lots of that religious hypocrisy happening. But at the end of the day, I wanted to show that things can be broken yet beautiful. And there are times you just have to embrace that imperfection, embrace that vulnerability. And isn't that just how all real places are? So I think that's kind of the importance of place. And I guess with describing Asher's character to you earlier, I spoke to you about why Delhi becomes so salient as well.
I definitely agree. I think that generally things like the dirty cobblestones, the rooftops, all of it. As someone who, I've only been to Lahore a few times and haven't seen this side of Lahore, so that was very fascinating and kind of, it just threw you into the mess of it. And I think that mess in itself was beautiful. It was something you wanted more of. And I love that the fact that you said that Rania needed that release. Every character, I think, or as readers generally, I think we're rooting for the characters to reach that crescendo. And when she
Yeah.
does, and it's not everything you think it is, that in itself, I guess, is beautiful. So my next question generally is a little about your writing process and journey, the way you transitioned into writing, and a little bit about your publishing journey. I think that's something all writers are interested in, the task of it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think the latter part, I'm just like, I wish I heard more of, people's publishing journey before I started writing, because I think that's probably the most daunting part. But just, I think the part on writing. So, Maheen, I wrote my first novella under the supervision of a really kind and generous professor of mine at LUMS, Dr. Ali Khan, who's just, he's just unbelievable when it comes to paying it forward. But so he supervised that. And I think that was the first time I reckoned with what I thought was the serious prospect of writing fiction. I look back at that today and I can't open it. It's so cringeworthy.
So
But, but I suppose, the last few years I've been focusing a lot on nonfiction pieces. I've written for The Guardian and The Independent and Dawn, etc. And that's happened kind of alongside this inception of Skyfall's writing. And I think in terms of writing, one thing that writing fiction made me realize, and does so even more post its release, is that especially at a time, I think, when we're in the grips of this attention economy, where suddenly everything is breaking news, and there's this almost like this currency of fear that we're operating in, where there's always the threat of a bomb, a disease, climate change, whatever that might be. And I think the form of the novel and creative writing allowed me to really break through some of that clutter and yet deliver a lot of truth about these pressing urgent issues, be that love jihad, be that women, be that the immigration apocalypse. But I think the form of creative writing allowed me to do it in a way that is not preachy, in a way where I'm hoping I'm not talking at readers, I'm not peddling an agenda. I think there's a beauty in which you can weave these things within fiction without being too didactic about it. And I remember Mohsin Hamid said this to me once, and it really rings true. He said something like, the novel feels even more important today at a time like this, and I think that really resonates with me. And so that's kind of been my journey with writing. Of course, there are days I had like 10 words, and there were days like I had, it was much more lush, but a lot of it is embracing that. And as far as publishing goes, so I guess I should say that I find conversations where people are trying to portray their journey and themselves as pitch perfect. I find them really insufferable. And so I think when I write and when I talk, I'm really conscious of the fact that I want to be open about my imperfections. And today you see Skyfall on a bookshelf and you're like, oh wow, how glorious, she's a published author. But I just kind of want to rip that back a little bit, peel back and say, that's just not how it started, and that's not what the journey looks like. In short, Maheen, I think I started out clueless. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. And that's because I didn't have access to an inner circle in publishing. I definitely didn't have a conventional degree in creative writing. I guess all I had was like a really, I don't know, just like a raging hunger to unearth this song. And that's why the headmaster's quote was so important. Now, as compelling a tagline as that sounds like, it's just not enough. It's not enough to have that fire and that hunger. Because I guess because writing a novel, I realized, is different from a speedy op-ed or a quick piece of flash fiction, and it's just, I guess it requires a very different level of blood, sweat, and tears. And if I go back to 2017 when I started, my younger daughter was 2.5 weeks old, and the older one was a year old, and I was very reluctant, and I was reluctant because I was like, I can do 3 chapters, but if somebody asked me to do 300 pages and I don't know if I'm going to get a contract for publishing, let's be honest, your eye is always on that prize and you think it's just that. I just want to see the book on a bookshelf. So I was like, I wish someone would just take a shot on me, give me a contract, and I'm going to write you a bestseller, I promise, but just take a shot on me. And also, I guess part of that anxiety stemmed from the fact that I'd researched it and I realized that the probability of first time fiction publishing, you're always told it's dangerously low, so you feel like I'm going to put in all this time. Yet, I think my journey with writing and publishing taught me a really, really important lesson. And I think I'm going to hopefully carry that into any other endeavor in the future. It's that, the germination and the culmination of an idea are always the most exciting stages. The day I heard the headmaster's words and I was like, oh gosh, I want to write this book. I want to like unleash this song. Of course it was exciting. Today, when I'm talking to you, when I'm promoting the book, I'm seeing it at Liberty. Of course it's rewarding. But I think the realization I had was that the middle part where you have to, clock in those hours. I remember sitting at NYU's library, kind of painstakingly chugging away at it, not knowing if I'd get a publisher, being in like, Sydney, Dubai, Karachi, Lahore, wherever on holiday, wanting to just chill, but saying, gosh, no, I need to get back to writing. I think that's what made me realize that middle process is just non-negotiable. And I think it's what differentiates a book that reaches the bookshelf from one that maybe doesn't get realized. And, I'm a working mother, and writing the book, those things, they didn't come easy. The process has not been straightforward. But in terms of literal publishing, I sent a pitch to my agent with 3 sample chapters, and he replied within 10 minutes and said, send me the manuscript. And subsequently then the Bloomsbury offer came through. And I think what really pleasantly surprised me was that a publishing house like Bloomsbury was willing to take a shot on someone who's a debutante, but also someone who doesn't have a massive social media following. I've realized it's a lot easier to publish your work if you've got a ton of followers. But I think when Bloomsbury and my agent took that shot on me, I realized maybe the story still does matter. Maybe your voice does matter. And maybe you can invest some of those energies on writing as opposed to trying to round up followers. So I think that's been my journey.
Agreed. I think that's That's so real. And that's something a lot of writers who generally don't give time to social media need to hear, that the story will essentially always be important, regardless of whether it's for publishing for an entire novel or even if it's just for you sitting on your laptop. I think you have to keep telling the stories no matter who reads them, I guess.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And I'm so glad you shared that. Thank you so much for sharing. I think that it's definitely something that'll help a lot of people because there's a lot of doubt, uncertainty, isolation, definitely when it comes to the writing experience.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you one question about your protagonist. Do you think, generally about narration, do you think your narrator is a reliable narrator?
What do you mean?
Do you think the readers, in your opinion, do you think readers tend to trust her or they have
I see.
this level of distrust?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you asked this question, Maheen, because I would say that I hope it's a combination of reactions that people have, because I think my intent with both the protagonists, and especially the female protagonist, was that we tend to storytell with this sense of, let's do a clean arc. Let's have people really just end to end, keep it black and white, and have, like, she can't do any wrong.
Yeah.
And I have to say that I think the decision to keep her gray was really conscious. And the fact that, again, I don't want to tell readers how to interpret this or think about it, but I think real people don't operate like that. Real people are imperfect. Real people succumb to temptations of all kinds. And I also didn't want people necessarily rooting for one person or another from start to finish. It's great if you get there in the end or at some point, and it's also okay if you don't. But I think it's also very exciting to just mess around a little bit with the reader and say, hey, like, I mean, you might be thinking I'm giving you something at one point, but it could turn the bend very quickly. So I love the question, and I also hope that we get a range of reactions when people read it. And I've already had like a few people who finished it say to me that, oh gosh, at that point we really thought this was going to happen, and that's not how it maybe turned out. And so I think that's the beauty of fiction, right? Like, I'm not shoving an interpretation or a sense of loyalty for anyone down your throat. So it's totally up to the reader to trust or not trust. And I also feel, again, like, reading fiction is almost like it's a co-creation with the reader. So when I consume material, I'm so immersed, I'm almost feeling like I'm part of that story, and it goes back to the days you think about people sitting around a campfire and storytelling, and everyone's a part of that huddle. So I mean, I think I would welcome all kinds of reactions, especially to Rania.
I find that really interesting, just the idea of the storytelling aspect, because I think for me, generally, when I'm reading, it's just me and the book, and there's no one else
Yeah.
within it. And I love that idea of it being something so intimate and personal. And so, this is my last question. I wanted to ask you, you've kind of answered it a bit, but just generally about storytelling, aside from what you've already told us, what do you think for you lies at the heart and the core of storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I was saying, I enjoy storytelling in all its forms, right? So if it's whether it's visual, whether it's fiction, whether it's nonfiction, I think it just opens up a window into a new world, right? In a world that could be relatable or could not be relatable. And so, in that sense, in a strange way, it feels like a form of traveling, whilst still, exactly like you said, being so intimate and being so solitary in so many ways, and without necessarily going anywhere. I think for me, what's been at the heart of storytelling, and it's still very much a work in progress. I don't think I've kind of mastered this. Is that I've had to invest a lot of time in trying to find my own voice, because you consume all this material, you read. There's Netflix, there's Amazon Prime, there's the work I do at NYU, and of course, it inspires you, it moves you. But then it's taken me a while, and I'm sure this is going to keep evolving. You think about, all right, I'm a South Asian woman of color, I'm from a middle class background, from a Muslim country. I think somewhere I realized that those kinds of aspects of my identity are very intimately bound with my storytelling. So that's one thing. I think the other thing for me, whether it's through a documentary, whether it's through Skyfall, is that I think what lies at the heart of powerful storytelling is, am I delivering my voice in a way that is easily understood by people, or is it deliberately esoteric? Like, I think if someone's having to read the same sentence of Skyfall thrice, I need to rethink it, and this has very much been a journey for me as well. If I go back to the novella I wrote in Lums, I struggled to read parts of those sentences as well, because obviously it was very new to me at the time, and the process. And I think my rule of thumb with storytelling is, if my mother cannot get it, then I'm operating in an intellectual echo chamber, and I need to revisit my writing. So I think that resonance is very important. And the last thing is, and I think this is something I've realized over time, is that I think storytelling has some kind of a musicality to it as well. And now I don't mean like the literal verses and shairi in something like Skyfall, which is of course poetic, but I think it's that sense of being like poetry in motion almost. And I remember we were watching a tennis match of Federer playing in Dubai once, and my brother said, "This looks like poetry in motion." And those words have stuck with me about writing as well, because it almost feels like it has a lyrical quality to it. People have said that to me about Skyfall as well, and earlier that kind of feedback used to make me tentative. Now I think I really embrace that, and sometimes when I read my own writing out loud, I also feel like it's all right if it's lyrical. And so I think at the heart of storytelling is, for me, has been to become comfortable with my voice, and kind of with my distinct way of telling the story.
Definitely, I agree. And I do think lyricality in prose comes out in a completely unique and beautiful way. There were so many times when I stopped and reread a few sentences in the novel because they had that lyricism to them, and I wanted to read them over and over again, and it did kind of match that art of poetry.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads me into asking whether you'd like to read a little bit, a sneak peek for our viewers.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I can read something. I could read a short piece. Okay, so this is towards the third section of the book, which is dawn, and kind of marks that movement from darkness to light, which, like I was saying, is a metaphor that lies at the heart of the book. So maybe I'll read from there. But I've seen my mother and sister navigate the sex trade. I've shaken myself in front of a room full of hawkers, and my body has been thrown into mid-air. I'm no stranger to bullies, and if there is one lesson that the Mohalla taught me, it is to never beg for a bully's kindness. How were you allowed to come to America so far away all by yourself? The officer asked. Allowed? I repeat. I didn't seek permission from anyone before coming. I want to tell the man to not judge a South Asian woman's mind by her brown skin. A mind is just a mind, be it fair or dark, resilient or vulnerable, spirited or lifeless. And some brown women have beautiful minds, which aren't limited to small talk. These brown women talk of how the world is bruised and bleeding, about failures, about dreams and what keeps them up at night, of the possibilities of outstripping reality, and of miracles to heal civilizations. They speak, who write and fight every day. I want to say something about how feminism too is versatile and kaleidoscopic, and that bra burning slogans with tongue in cheek placards hoisted by white women is only one of its manifestations.
That was so lovely. I loved every bit of it.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you.
So my final question is, I want to ask you, what's next?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I said, well, no, not any longer. I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old. I have 2 small daughters. So I hope sleep is next. I hope abundance of sleep is next. But no, seriously, I thought I'd written these pages and now the work's done. So I think post-release has been very, very exhausting. I'm tired. I'm enjoying it, but I think it's been very consuming. I'm kind of showering the kids and I'm thinking about what am I going to say at the Emirates Lit Fest. And I've never done this stuff before. So it's like, I think I'm quite exhausted right now. But in terms of in terms of creative stuff, so I think I'm gonna focus on visual storytelling for a bit, and I've directed a mini series. It's in post production right now, which is based on Me Too in South Asia, and it's a series that is based on interviews with women from South Asia. They're women from India, Nepal, and Pakistan. College students who are survivors of sexual harassment, and it's obviously been a very difficult series to direct because there are girls in that who've said to me that we've not even told our mothers these stories, and it's taken everything within us to come and talk, but they're glad for that space. I guess Maheen, the reason why I'm really invested in this visual storytelling project is that we often tend to take something that starts in the West and then just like copy paste it into our environment without thinking about the local dynamics. And I'm hoping that a series like this allows us to do this in a less cookie cutter kind of way. I hope in some ways it's the starting point for the woman who works in my mother's home. I want her to have the tools to eventually be able to talk about Me Too, right? I don't just want to sit in an air-conditioned drawing room and have this conversation because it sounds really fashionable. So I guess to me, a series like this is nothing less than revolutionary. I think it's quietly fierce. I'm hoping it can mark the first step to interrupting sexual violence without necessarily alienating men. So I think that's what's next. It's going to release later this year. Still some work to do on that, but it's been a mixture of being difficult, overwhelming, but very, very satisfying as well. So that's on the cards.
Wow, congratulations. That sounds, I think that's something we as society definitely need. And I hope it reaches people in the right way. Now, I thought we can, last 5 minutes, we can take a few questions from the viewers as well.
Sure.
So we can kind of go through the comments. I'm just scrolling up to see them.
Sure.
Okay, a lot of praise, Saba. Okay, that's lovely, Saba. The characters, as you say, are messy or contradictory, but they are so real, can be related to at so many different levels. Definitely. I totally agree. Yeah. That's a great question. Thanks, Saba, for sharing your journey with us. Wish you success ahead. Lovely. We'll give it 2 more minutes before we wrap it up. But also, in the meantime, if you haven't bought your copy yet, here it is. Have a look. Make sure to get it. You can buy it from Liberty. It is a must read. Saba, is there anything else you want to add? All the best for your future.
I think that's pretty much it. But I've really enjoyed this conversation, Maheen. Thank you for just it's been really generative, and it's also great for me because I think you don't think about so many of these things as you're writing, and it's just been a really beautiful opportunity to talk to you and think back to that process now in a slightly calmer way. Any advice for young writers? That's my niece. Hi, Alina. Thanks for that question. I don't know. I'm mostly just busy consuming advice quite greedily. Um, I think it's what I said to Maheen earlier, which is to say that, if I'm to bear out my heart and be open about vulnerability, it is to say that I've second guessed this process so much. I've had so many nights of in the lead up to Skyfall of just waking up at 3 a.m. and thinking, I've said this to my sister a lot. I'm like, why did I start this? Why did I ever bring this upon myself? And that wasn't in some kind of humble or modest way. So I think the only advice I have is that the same thing I said about staying that course and putting in that effort. I know hard work sounds like such a horribly preachy thing to say, but
What it
I
is.
think it's non-negotiable. And I think I had a time where I wanted to write because it was like, oh, I want to be a published author and that's it. But I think your motivation has to be beyond just seeing your book on a bookshelf, which is great, but it has to be the unearthing of that song. So that middle part of really putting pen to paper, 6 words or 60 pages, I think that's non-negotiable.
Definitely. And thank you so much for sharing your words and for this book and for this opportunity. And we
Thank
hope
you
you
so
all
much.
had a lovely time as well. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Maheen. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.